Welcome back, everyone. So, most of us spend some time on the internet every day. And while we've heard of the dark web, it's a part of the digital world that remains largely a mystery. Here to separate fact from fiction and break down what we need to know about the dark web is security intelligence engineer Kristina Bay-Lum. Hello, Kristina.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is going to be, I feel like one of those eye opening and scary segments all at the same time. So we're so excited for you to guide us through this. And we start with the basic question: what exactly is the dark web?
Right. So the way I basically explain the internet is by separating it into three parts. And the first is what we call the surface or the open web. This is everything that can be indexed by a search engine that you could find by going to Google or Bing and typing in a keyword. It's things like, a Wikipedia page or a catalog of things you can purchase from an online store. And this actually only makes up about 3% of the internet, which is kind of amazing. The rest of that 97% is what's called the deep web. And although it sounds a little scary, what that really means is just websites or web pages that you can't access without some kind of authentication. So these are things like academic records or government records, or even, say, your Amazon purchase history. And that's what makes up the rest of this 97%. Now, within the deep web, that's where we find the dark web. And these are websites or web pages that exist on private servers or hidden networks that you need special software to access.
Okay, so hold up here. If only 3% of the web is really kind of what you were using, or what are we missing out on with that other 97%?
Yeah, it always sounds like we're missing a lot, but the sad reality is that because everything is that lives in the dark web is basically just hidden by authentication, we're really not missing any public information or anything that isn't, say, like somebody else's Amazon purchase history. So we're really not missing a lot.
All right. So, if it is hidden, like in private servers, then how are people getting access to it and what using that information for harm?
Yeah, what's interesting is you can only actually access these websites on the dark web using special software. And this software relies on something called onion routing, which is just a fancy way of saying that they're using layers of encryption to hide who you are, where you're going, where you live, what websites you visited on the internet, what websites you're going to visit on the internet. And it basically means that your session is virtually untraceable. So it's totally anonymous on the dark web.
Okay, maybe as the name implies, I don't know, but it sounds like the dark web is a place where there's these illicit and illegal activities happening. So take us through what actual, I guess if you could call it, products and services and activities are happening in the dark web.
So it's interesting because with this environment that's totally anonymous, you can actually find pretty much anything on the dark web. Things can get pretty, well, for lack of a better word, dark. You can find everything from stolen credit cards, passports, people's social insurance numbers, to even illicit drugs and weapons. You have people who are selling malicious applications, typically to those who just don't have the technical ability to build them themselves, but want to try and distribute them and try to make some quick money. And what's interesting is you can even find things that are not actually illegal. You can find books and art, and those vendors typically tend to be people who just have political views that align more with this idea of the open internet and an environment that has no restrictions on what you can share.
Let's talk about the dark web and the pandemic. So, how are cyber criminals taking advantage, like exploiting people's anxiety around COVID-19 right now?
Yeah, all of these malicious actors are definitely trying to exploit all of the anxiety we're feeling as a public about the pandemic. You're seeing, in addition to the typical drug and weapon sales on the dark web, you're seeing things like counterfeit antiviral medication, even real but illegal antiviral medication, COVID-19 test kits. People are trying to sell COVID-19 cures for crazy amounts of money, 25,000 US dollars. They're claiming they have a cure for COVID-19 as long as you purchase it from this particular vendor. And we're also seeing an uptick in the number of certain stolen accounts. For example, people's Zoom information, login accounts for Zoom, login accounts for Facebook. a significant increase in the number of stolen credit cards as we're all shopping online more. And then we're also seeing COVID specific malware that's being distributed through the dark web. So things that are, attempting to sort of coerce the public into downloading an application that might give you more information about the pandemic, but could really actually be compromising your device.
So, let's talk about some of these scams, whether COVID related or not. It sounds like many of them are originating in the dark web, which is the part of that 97%, but it sounds like they end up surfacing and getting users in the 3%. They sort of break through up into the surface web. So I'm an average user. What do I need to know to be on the lookout to protect myself?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these criminals recognize that the vast majority of us aren't using the dark web on a daily basis, if at all. And so all of these scams are bubbling up to the surface. We're seeing things like phishing attacks, where you might get an email from a company that appears to be your airline saying that your flight has been canceled due to COVID-19 and to click here to get your refund. A lot of attacks like that are specifically based around the COVID-19 pandemic. They're capitalizing on the fact that people likely had plans that were canceled, or they're anxious for more information, or they might have been using certain accounts like Netflix and Spotify a lot more, and they may click on a link that's being sent through an email if it looks like it's from a verified source. So we're seeing a significant number of those attacks on the surface web, along with even things like advertisements for super cheap PPE, or again, antiviral medication, or any of these things that might actually be sold in the dark web that these vendors are trying to advertise to the public.
So you've mentioned that the dark web can be a hotspot for data breaches. What if we find out that our personal information has been compromised and it's being bought and sold there? What's the best plan of action?
This is where things get a little tricky, because without having any kind of jurisdiction in the dark web, there really isn't a way to have your information removed. There are services that are offered by a lot of antivirus vendors, as well as even banks, to kind of do this dark web patrolling and see whether your name or any personal information comes up on the dark web. But they can't really tell you where it exists, or they can't really remove it either. And so the best thing to do, if you're finding that you've been compromised somehow, whether that's an account for a particular software, or a credit card number, or even something like your personal identity and identifiable information, the best thing to do is deal with those individual units. So the first thing would be, if you have a stolen credit card number, immediately call your financial institution, let them know that this has happened, cancel that credit card, and just sort of keep an eye on your statements for the next little while. If it's something, a little bit more serious, like having personal information that's government related leaked on the dark web, it's calling that particular government agency and letting them know that this has happened. And then again, it's making sure that if it's something like a Spotify account or a Netflix account, that you're going through and you're changing your passwords there. And also even just changing passwords that might be used across all of these different platforms. Because if somebody has tried to, say, compromise your Netflix account using a particular password, and you also use that account password with another service like Spotify, then it's likely that that same actor will try and compromise that sort of related account as well.
Yeah, it's staying two steps ahead, indeed. Okay, so we've been talking about all the illicit activity, dangerous activity in the dark web. Is there any scenario where what happens there is for good?
Yeah, absolutely. That's where the good news comes in. The dark web is not all dark and illicit and scary. It's actually used for a lot of really important reasons. And one of the most important is as a way for journalists and political dissidents to actually communicate and to share information. And even for those activists living in countries under regimes that might actually restrict internet access, for them to be able to share their stories and to be able to share what's happening in their government, within their government-run, say, country, and share all those details with the public, especially if there are human rights abuses, or if there are particular activities that we might not be aware of because there is so much restriction within that country. Being able to share that information with the public and with journalists in particular is incredibly helpful.
Kristina, you've been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us so much to think about.
Thank you so much for having me. It was nice talking to you.
We'll be right back.